Eleanor sat huddled by the edge of the misty lake, her face pale and dazed, as if the weight of her despair had drained the life from her. She had come here, to this desolate place, with a single purpose: to end her wretched existence. Yet, when faced with the cold, unyielding reality of death, her courage faltered, leaving her trembling in the shadow of her own resolve. All her life, Eleanor had believed that living was the true challenge. Death, she thought, was a simple escape. For someone like her, who had never learned to swim, it would be effortless. In the dead of night, with no one around, she could slip into the dark, glassy waters of the lake and let it claim her. No complications, no second thoughts. It would be over in moments. She had always dismissed those failed suicides she'd heard about, people who swallowed pills or leapt into rivers only when others were near, as if they were merely staging a cry for help, a desperate plea for attention. Eleanor was different. If she chose death, she would see it through swiftly, decisively, without hesitation. And yet, she had failed. The icy grip of fear had betrayed her, holding her back from the abyss she had so resolutely chosen. She sat there, shivering, her heart pounding as the wind whispered through the skeletal trees surrounding the lake, their gnarled branches clawing at the moonlit sky. From the distance, the faint thump of music drifted from James's house, each note twisting the knife deeper into Eleanor's chest. The sound was a cruel reminder of the life she thought she'd had, the love she thought was hers. Eleanor and James had been in love for over 4 years, a romance that was the talk of their small, fog-shrouded village in the English countryside. Everyone knew of their bond, whispered about it in the dim-lit pubs and over tea in cozy parlors. James, though charming, was known for his carefree ways, a man who drifted through life without a thought for the future, uninterested in the toil of work or the burdens of responsibility. But to Eleanor, his affection for her was unwavering, a beacon of hope in her otherwise bleak world. Her family had tried to warn her, their voices stern and pleading. They saw James for what he was, a man who would drag her into a life of hardship, a husband who would never provide the stability she deserved. "He's not the sort to settle down, Eleanor," her mother had said, her eyes dark with worry. "He'll leave you to carry the weight alone." But Eleanor's heart refused to listen. She saw something in James that no one else did. He was young, she told herself, unburdened by the chains of family or duty. Once they were married, she was certain his love for her would transform him. He'd see her struggles, feel her sacrifices, and rise to the occasion, becoming the man she needed him to be. Her faith in him was unshakable. No matter how many warnings she received, no matter how many sidelong glances the villagers cast her way, Eleanor stood firm. James, too, had made promises grand, sweeping promises of a future together, of a life built on love. For the first time, James had kept one of those promises. He took a job delivering goods from the nearby town to the scattered hamlets along the misty moors. It wasn't grueling work, just a few trips a week, but to Eleanor it was a triumph. She glowed with pride, eager to tell the world that her love had changed him, that the man they'd called lazy and reckless was proving them wrong. Their wedding was set for the next January, delayed by some old superstition about the timing of their union. Eleanor didn't mind the wait. She was patient, dreaming of the day she'd walk down the aisle, her heart full of hope. Over the years, she had poured everything into James. She'd helped his family repair their crumbling cottage, bought him a sleek motorbike to replace his old, battered one, even paid off debts he'd racked up before they met, debts he never spoke of, but which she discovered in quiet, shameful moments. From grand gestures to small ones, new clothes, polished shoes, even socks, she had done it all, always in secret. She couldn't bear the thought of anyone knowing, not for her sake, but for his and her family. If they ever learned the truth, They'd never let her hear the end of it. Eleanor had always been resourceful, a woman who'd built a small fortune through her own cunning and thrift. Since her teens, she'd worked tirelessly, saving every penny, her sharp mind turning small trades into a comfortable nest egg by the time she was 24. But no one knew, not her family, not her friends, that she'd given it all to James. After all, the cottage would one day be theirs. She was to be his wife, wasn't she? So she poured her savings into fixing it up, dreaming of the day she'd step into it as Mrs. James, her head held high, the envy of the village. When James settled into his delivery job, she saw an opportunity. She taught him how to leverage his contacts, how to turn his routes into a small trading business. She emptied the last of her savings to help him start, believing in the future they'd build together. For a while, it worked. James's business flourished, and Eleanor's heart soared. But as she wove her dreams of a perfect future, a shadow crept into their story, a shadow she hadn't seen coming. Whispers began to circulate, carried on the damp wind that swept through the village. James, they said, was growing close to another, a merchant's daughter he met on his routes. Eleanor refused to believe it. James loved her. He'd always loved her. The rumors were just petty jealousy, sparked by his newfound success. Still, doubt gnawed at her. She confronted him one evening, her voice trembling as she stood in the dim light of his cottage, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and something faintly metallic. "James, tell me the truth," she said, her eyes searching his. "Is there someone else?" He laughed, a sound that should have been reassuring, but instead sent a chill down her spine. "Good God, Eleanor, who's spreading such vicious lies? You're the only one for me. You know that. You wouldn't lie to me, would you?" She pressed, her voice barely above a whisper. James pulled her close, his lips brushing her hair in a gesture that felt too practiced, too perfect. "We're getting married soon, aren't we? Don't let these rumors poison what we have. Our love has survived 4 years of trials and doubts. You know I'd never betray you. If you don't trust me, Eleanor, it'll break my heart." His words were honey, sweet and soothing, and Eleanor felt a pang of guilt for doubting him. "I'm sorry," she murmured, her voice cracking. "I shouldn't have listened to them. I trust you, James, I do." "And stop this nonsense," he said, his tone sharpening just enough to make her flinch. "You keep doubting me, and it's like you don't believe in us at all." "I'm sorry," she said again, pressing a kiss to his cheek, desperate. "To make things right, I won't do it again, I promise." "That's my girl," he said, his smile returning, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something cold, something that didn't belong. As she left his cottage that night, the fog seemed thicker, the shadows deeper. The village felt different, as if it were watching her, waiting for something to happen. And now, as she sat by the lake, the music from James's house pulsing through the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly, horribly wrong. Eleanor had once basked in the warmth of James's tender gestures, his whispered promises wrapping around her heart like a comforting shroud. The village's whispers of his infidelity had faded under the weight of his affection, dismissed as mere gossip born of envy. But now, as she stood in the shadow of betrayal, those whispers clawed their way back, sharp and venomous, echoing. In the hollow of her mind, it began with a mistake at delivery gone wrong. Eleanor's mother, Margaret, had unleashed a torrent of scolding upon James, her voice cutting through the cramped parlor of their stone-walled home. In the past, James had borne such reprimands in silence, his head bowed, his eyes clouded with a quiet sadness. But this time, something snapped. The air in the room grew heavy, as if the very walls were holding their breath. James's face twisted, his eyes blazing with a fury Eleanor had never seen. "Look at the bloody order again, Margaret," he roared, his voice reverberating off the cold stone. It's written clear as day. If there's a mistake, it's yours, not mine. Don't think you can lord over me just because you pay my wages. I'm not some spineless fool you can trample on. Margaret froze, her eyes wide with shock, her mouth agape. Eleanor stood rooted to the spot, her heart pounding as she stared at the man she thought she knew. This wasn't her James, the charming, carefree boy who kissed her under the starlit oaks. This was someone else, someone whose rage seemed to pulse with a darkness that made the room feel smaller. Cold or Dutch, she couldn't fathom it. Even if he was in the right, even if her mother had misjudged him, couldn't he have softened his words for her sake? For their future? How could he speak with such venom, such disregard for the woman who would one day be his mother-in-law? The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the creak of the old house settling in the evening chill. Eleanor snapped out of her daze and rushed to James, her voice trembling as she grabbed his arm. James, please, calm down. Let's talk this through. Before she could finish, he jerked his arm free with a violence that sent her stumbling backward, nearly crashing into the hearth. And you, he bellowed, his voice a snarl that seemed to echo from somewhere deeper, darker. Don't think you can control me either. I'm done with you and your meddling mother. I quit right here, right now. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat, her words choked by the raw force of his anger. Margaret, her face flushed with indignation, lunged forward, seizing James by the collar of his coat. You think you can speak to us like that? She spat, her voice sharp as a blade. Fine then. The engagement between you and my Eleanor ends this instant. Margaret's words hung in the air, heavy with finality. She expected James to falter, to beg for forgiveness, to crumble under the weight of what he was throwing away. But instead, a cold, mocking smile curled his lips, his eyes glinting with something cruel, almost inhuman. You think your daughter's the only one out there? He sneered. I don't need her, Margaret. Marry her off to whoever you want, or keep her locked away to rot. It's nothing to me. With a brutal shove, he freed himself from Margaret's grip and stormed toward the door, his boots echoing like thunder on the wooden floor. Not once did he glance back at Eleanor, not even a flicker of remorse in his stride as he vanished into the fog beyond the threshold. Eleanor stood frozen in the corner, her body trembling as the world she'd built crumbled around her. The scene that had just unfolded felt like a nightmare, a cruel hallucination conjured by the oppressive gloom of the village. How could her James speak with such heartlessness? How could he discard their love, their 4 years of promises, as if they were nothing? Had he stopped loving her? Or had he never loved her at all? No, she thought, her mind screaming against the truth. It couldn't be? He was just angry, humiliated by her mother's unjust accusations. Once his temper cooled, he'd come back. He'd apologize, take her in his arms, and everything would be as it was. It had to be. Margaret's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp and relentless. Do you see now, Eleanor? Do you see what he truly is? This is the man you'd marry? He's shown his true colors before you've even tied the knot. I warned you, time and again, but you wouldn't listen. Spare the rod, spoil the child, and now look at the mess you're in. Eleanor clutched her head, tears streaming down her face as she sank to her knees. Mother, please, she sobbed. Don't say that. He's just upset. He's tired. He's been working so hard, and you blamed him unfairly. Please, stop. Margaret shook her head, her expression a mix of pity and exasperation. You're beyond saving, child. You're so lost in him, you can't see the truth. Mark my words, Eleanor, he'll be the ruin of you. Unable to bear another word, Eleanor fled to her room, slamming the door behind her and collapsing onto her bed. She buried her face in her pillow, her sobs muffled as the weight of the day pressed down on her. The house seemed to groan in sympathy, its timbers creaking as if whispering secrets she wasn't ready to hear. All afternoon and into the night, Eleanor waited, her heart tethered to the hope that James would come. She imagined him knocking softly on the door, his voice low and contrite, begging her forgiveness. But the hours dragged on, and the only sound was the wind howling outside, rattling the windows like restless spirits. By nightfall, her hope began to waver. Perhaps his pride was holding him back, or maybe he feared facing Margaret after his outburst. She clung to every excuse, desperate to justify his absence. Sleep eluded her that night, her mind tormented by questions that had no answers. At the first hint of dawn, when the sky was still a bruised gray, she slipped out of the house and made her way to James's cottage, her footsteps heavy on the dew-soaked path. The village was eerily silent, the fog curling around her like a living thing, its tendrils brushing her skin with an unnatural chill. When she reached the cottage, James's mother, Agnes, was already at the door, her face stern and unyielding. "Eleanor," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the morning mist, "don't come here anymore. Leave my James alone." Eleanor's heart stuttered. "Mrs. Agnes, please," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "I just need to see him." Anne's eyes narrowed, her tone cold and final. "James is getting married, Eleanor, to someone else. You should be happy for him. His new fiancée comes from a wealthy family, but they don't look down on us like some do." Eleanor's knees buckled, the words hitting her like a physical blow. "Mrs. Agnes, please," she whispered, her voice trembling with desperation. "I've never looked down on James. It was just a misunderstanding with my mother." Anne's lips twisted into a bitter smile, her eyes glinting with something that sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. "Misunderstanding or not, it's over. James is moving on. He's getting married this month." Eleanor's world tilted, her vision blurring as she fought to stay upright. "Is it true?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Tell me it's not true." Anne's gaze softened for a moment, but her words were merciless. "Why would I lie? You'll see for yourself soon enough. They're out today, picking out wedding things. The ceremony's happening any day now." Eleanor felt as if the ground had opened beneath her, threatening to swallow her whole. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her body betrayed her, her strength ebbing away. She forced herself to nod, a mechanical gesture, and turned away from the cottage, her steps faltering as she stumbled back toward home. A fog seemed to thicken around her, whispering her fears back to her in a chorus of ghostly voices. She wouldn't believe it not until she heard it from James himself. She had to see him, had to look into his eyes and demand the truth. Only then could she accept the nightmare that was closing in around her. Eleanor collapsed onto her bed, her body drained of all strength, as if the very act of walking home had sapped the last of her will. She lay there, half on the mattress, half dangling toward the floor, motionless as the shadows lengthened across the room. The dim light of dusk seeped through the curtains, casting a sickly pallor over the chamber, and the air felt thick with an oppressive silence, broken only by the distant howl of the wind. That evening, she dragged herself to James's cottage, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and dread. But he wasn't there. The windows stared back at her, dark and empty, like the eyes of a corpse. She sent message after message, her fingers trembling over her phone, until finally, James agreed to meet her. When she saw him, after just 2 days apart, Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. A man standing before her was not the James she knew. Gone was the tender smile, the gentle touch that had anchored her through 4 years of love. In its place was a stranger arrogant, cold, his gaze as indifferent as the fog that clung to the village. His eyes, once warm, now glinted with a cruel detachment that sent a shiver down her spine, as if something darker lurked beneath his skin. "Is it true?" Eleanor asked, her voice breaking as she fought back tears. "Are you really getting married this month?" James shrugged, a smirk curling his lips. Most likely. Don't worry, Eleanor. I'll be sure to send you an invitation." His tone was mocking, his expression insufferable. Eleanor's composure shattered. "What about our wedding?" She cried, her voice echoing in the empty lane. "What about all the promises you made to me?" James raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Promises? Did I make any promises?" "Funny, I don't recall. Got a recording of me saying anything like that? Or maybe a contract with my signature. My head's been a bit foggy lately. You see, too many things to juggle. Oh, and as for our so-called engagement, didn't your mother call it off in front of half the village?" "Plenty of witnesses, Eleanor. Shall I fetch them for you?" Tears streamed down her face, but Eleanor gripped the gnarled trunk of an ancient yew tree beside the road, steadying herself against the wave of despair, threatening to pull her under. She wanted to remind him of their shared moments, the quiet evenings under the stars, the whispered dreams of a future together, but his cold, mocking demeanor silenced her. The words of love she longed to speak turned to ash in her mouth. Instead, she forced out a different demand, her voice trembling but resolute. "Fine, marry whoever you want. But before you do, give me back the money I gave you, all of it, every penny I poured into you over the years." James threw back his head and laughed, a harsh, guttural sound that seemed to echo unnaturally in the misty air, as if the village itself were mocking her. "Oh, that's rich. You're a clever one, aren't you, Eleanor? Trying to trap me, eh? What's this? Some scheme to force me to marry you? Tell me the truth. Did you get yourself in trouble with some other man and think you could pin it on me?" Eleanor's vision blurred with rage and pain. Words failed her, and in a surge of desperation, she swung her hand, striking James across the face with a force that stung her palm. His head snapped to the side, but his laughter only grew louder, a vile, grating sound that chased her as she turned and fled into the fog. The echoes of his cruelty lingered, clawing at her as she stumbled through the darkened lanes. The pain that consumed Eleanor was beyond comprehension. The village might pity her for losing James to another woman, but no one could grasp the true depth of her anguish. It wasn't just the loss of love, it was the shattering realization that James had played her for a fool all along. He had taken everything: her trust, her devotion, her savings, even her innocence. She had given him her heart, her body, her future, and he had woven a web of lies, performing the role of a loving partner while draining her dry. Eleanor saw herself as nothing now, a worthless shell, blind to the truth for years. In her eyes, James had been the kindest, most gentle man, worthy of every sacrifice. How could she have been so deceived? How could she have failed to see the monster beneath the mask? She was left with nothing but a searing pain that would haunt her to her dying day, and a shame so heavy she could never share it with another soul. The weight of it crushed her, leaving her to drift through the days like a ghost. Her spirit broken Dot at first. Margaret berated her, her words sharp with "I told you so's." But as Eleanor's despair deepened, her mother's anger softened into pity. She tried to comfort her daughter, offering words of solace, but each attempt only twisted the knife deeper. Eleanor felt like a husk, existing without living, her days bleeding into one another in a haze of grief. The day before, James's cottage had buzzed with preparations for his wedding, the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifting through the village like a taunt. Eleanor had curled up in her room, her thoughts spiraling toward death as the only escape. That morning, with the house empty, she saw her chance. She dragged herself to the lake behind their home, its surface black and still, reflecting the twisted branches overhead like a mirror to our fractured soul. The lake was deep, its depths rumored to hide secrets no one dared speak of. One step, one plunge, and her suffering would end. No more pain, no more betrayal. The distant sounds of revelry from James's cottage, shouts of cheers, and raucous music cut through her like shards of glass. By now, the bride must have arrived. James was likely standing beside her, smug and triumphant, exchanging vows in the very cottage Eleanor had poured her life savings into. Every brick, every tile, was bought with her sweat and tears. She had dreamed of a future where they'd sit together on that porch, their children playing under the moonlight, laughing as James spun tales of their life together. Now, another woman would live that dream, her children running across the yard Eleanor had envisioned as her own. Tears blurred her vision, streaming down her cheeks as she clenched her jaw and closed her eyes, willing herself to stand, to leap into the lake's cold embrace. But her body refused to move, as if an unseen force pinned her to the earth. She sank to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably, her cries swallowed by the desolate silence of the lake. "Oh God," she wailed, her voice raw and broken. "What have I done to deserve this? Why have you cursed me so? I loved him with all my heart. How could he betray me so cruelly? How am I to live now when I've lost all faith in humanity? Please, God, give me the strength to end this. I can't bear another moment of this life." Her sobs grew weaker, her body trembling with exhaustion. As the fog thickened around her, Eleanor's strength gave out, and she collapsed, unconscious, on the lonely shore of the lake, the cold earth cradling her broken form as the distant music mocked her from afar. Eleanor awoke with a start, her senses reeling as she found herself in a place utterly alien to her. The air was damp and heavy, carrying a faint, musty scent that clung to her skin. She lay on a rough wooden bed in a cramped, unfamiliar room, its walls shrouded in shadows. The light had faded, perhaps to twilight, and with no candles or lamps. To pierce the gloom, the world around her was a blur of indistinct shapes, as if the room itself were holding its secrets just out of reach. Her throat burned with thirst, parched and raw, stifling any cry she might have made. She tried to sit up, but her limbs felt leaden, betraying her will. Resigned, she lay still, her heart pounding in the oppressive silence, waiting for something, anything, to break the stillness. After what felt an eternity, when the last traces of light from the window had vanished, she heard the faint shuffle of footsteps. A dim glow approached, flickering like a will-o'-the-wisp in the darkness. Squinting, Eleanor made out the figure of an older man, his face weathered and stern, etched with lines that spoke of a life of hardship. He held a single white candle, its flame casting a cold, wavering light that seemed to dance with a life of its own. God, as Eleanor struggled to prop herself up, the man hurried to her side, his voice urgent but gentle. "No, no, stay still," he sighed, his hand raised to stop her. "You're weak, lass. Don't push yourself, it won't do you any good." Eleanor's voice was a hoarse whisper, barely audible. Where am I? How did I get here?" The man set the candle on a wooden table nearby, its flame flickering, as if reluctant to reveal too much. He turned to her, his eyes heavy with a quiet sorrow. "I found you unconscious by the lake," he said slowly. "I heard a bit about what's happened to you. I couldn't leave you there, not in that state. I feared if you woke up still by that water, you might do something unwise." Eleanor's brow furrowed, confusion mingling with her exhaustion. "You know about me? What do you mean?" The man's lips curved into a sad, fleeting smile, his gaze distant. "I'll tell you everything in time, lass. But first, let me say this. Don't be so quick to throw your life away. No matter how cruel the world seems, No matter how deep the pain, you must hold on to yourself. Life is worth protecting. Eleanor shook her head weakly, tears welling in her eyes as she closed them, her voice trembling. You don't understand? You can't know the shame, the agony I'm carrying. What's the point of living like this? There's nothing left for me. Nothing. If you'd let me die by that lake, I'd have thanked you. The man's expression softened, but his eyes held a weight that made her shiver. You think death is an escape? He asked, his voice low, almost a whisper, as if the shadows themselves were listening. What if I told you death doesn't always bring peace? What if you died, only to find your soul tethered to this world, unable to rest because of unfinished debts? You'd wander, a ghost among the living, seeing their joys, their sorrows, their thoughts, but unable to touch them, to speak to them. Imagine the torment of that, Eleanor knowing everything, yet being nothing. Eleanor's sobs broke free, her voice sharp with despair. Don't lecture me. Don't try to scare me with your stories. What do you know of death? You talk as if you've been through it yourself. The man stepped closer, helping her sit up against the rough wall, his hands steady but gentle. He handed her a tin cup of water, its surface catching the candlelight like a dark mirror. As she drank, he spoke again, his voice calm but laced with an unsettling certainty. What if I told you I have been through it? Eleanor drained the cup, her hands shaking as she set it down. She stared at him, her patience fraying. I'm not in the mood for your jests, she said, her voice edged with bitterness. Please, leave me be. Glancing toward the window, she froze. The world outside was swallowed by an impenetrable darkness, a void so absolute it seemed to press against the glass. I need to go home, she said, her voice trembling as she swung her legs off the bed, her movements unsteady. It's late. The man remained seated, watching her with a quiet intensity. You're not strong enough to leave yet, he said softly. Stay here, rest for the night. I promise you'll be safe. Eleanor laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that echoed in the small room. Safe? You think I care about that? Nothing matters anymore. I've tasted every kind of pain, every betrayal. There's nothing left to fear, not you, not this place, nothing. I just want to leave. The man's eyes darkened, his voice heavy with regret. Go then, if you must. But I'm warning you, Eleanor, you won't make it far in your state. She ignored him, gripping the wall for support as she stumbled toward the door. At the threshold, she paused, her breath catching as she peered into the night. The darkness was absolute, a suffocating blackness that seemed to swallow the stars themselves, as if the sky had been draped in a funeral shroud. Not a single light flickered in the distance, not even the faint glow of the village she knew lay nearby. Where is this place? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Tinged with rising panic. The man's voice came from behind her, steady and unnervingly calm. This is the edge of nowhere. I'm not joking. Eleanor snapped, her fear sharpening into anger as she spun to face him. Nor am I, he replied, his tone unshaken, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her skin crawl. She glared at him, her heart racing. Tell me the truth. Where am I? How far is this from my home? How did you bring me here? And how do I get back? The man leaned forward, his fingers brushing away a drop of wax that had dripped onto the table, holding it up to the candlelight as if studying some hidden truth within it. The flame flickered, casting his face in sharp relief, and for a moment, his eyes seemed to glow with an unnatural light. This place, he said at last, is neither far from your home nor close. I brought you here by taking your hand and leading you through the fog. If you want to return, go back to that bed and sleep. Only then will you find the strength to make the journey. Eleanor's anger flared, her voice rising in frustration. "Stop speaking in riddles. I'm done with your games." But as she turned back to the door, her strength faltered, her legs trembling beneath her. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and a wave of self-pity crashed over her. She was a fool, mocked by the man she loved, abandoned by the life she'd built. And now, even this stranger seemed to toy with her, as if her suffering were a jest to be shared in the darkness. Sobbing, she sank against the wall, her body shaking with exhaustion and despair. The world had turned its back on her, and this strange, shadowed place felt like the final cruel twist of fate, not as if sensing the turmoil in Eleanor's mind. The man rose slowly from his chair and moved to the door, his movements deliberate, almost spectral. Gently, he guided her back to the bed, his touch cold yet steady. "Don't think I'm toying with you," he said, his voice low, carrying a weight that seemed to press against the walls of the dim room. "What I'm telling you is the truth, every word. This place, it hangs between the worlds of the living and the dead, a liminal void where lost souls linger, waiting for their time to be fulfilled." Eleanor's eyes widened, her breath catching in her throat. "You're saying this is a place for ghosts?" The man nodded faintly, the candlelight casting long shadows across his weathered face, making it appear almost translucent in the flickering glow. "Then I'm dead?" Eleanor's voice trembled, a strange mix of fear and hope, as if the thought brought her a twisted sense of relief. He shook his head, his expression somber. "No, lass, you're not dead. Not yet. Your body still breathes, your heart still beats, though it's weary. Right now, your family is gathered around you, fighting to bring you back. Rest, Eleanor. Gather your strength and return to them." She clutched his arm, her sobs breaking free as tears streamed down her face. "No, no, please," she begged, her voice raw with desperation. "Let me stay here. I can't go back to that world. I'm done with it. Done with living." The man placed a gentle hand on her trembling shoulder, easing her back onto the bed. His touch was both comforting and unnervingly cold, as if it carried the chill of the grave. "Do you know what it's like here?" he asked, his voice soft but piercing. "There's no sun, no moon, no stars, just endless darkness or a pale, ghostly light that never warms. No laughter, no joy, nothing. Only shadows and regret. Many who come here wish they'd never chosen this path. Life, for all its pain, has meaning. Here time drags on, endless and empty. Souls linger, neither living nor truly dead, unable to return to the world above or descend to what lies below. They're forgotten, existing yet not existing, present yet unseen. That kind of existence, Eleanor, it's a torment beyond anything you've known. You think death will free you from your pain, but this place? This is where pain takes root, sharper and clearer than ever. Listen to me, go back to your life. The wounds you carry will fade with time. Nothing lasts forever, not even despair. After the storm, the sky always clears." His words poured over her, heavy with conviction, but Eleanor's heart remained unyielding. She wept, her body shaking as she clung to her resolve. "I can't go back," she sobbed. "I can't face James and his new wife, watching them live happily in the home I built, day after day. It'll destroy me." The man's gaze softened, but his eyes held a haunted depth, as if reflecting a pain older than time itself. "I thought as you do once," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet it seemed to echo in the stillness. "I loved my wife. With everything I had, gave her all I could. But she betrayed me, conspired with my closest friend to ruin me. I lost her, my fortune, my name, everything. In my rage, I thought death was the answer, that it would end my suffering. But here, in this place, I see them still her and him, tangled in their stolen moments, moments I'd never have witnessed if I'd lived. Worse, I see my children, their pain, their struggles, and I can do nothing. I hear their cries, feel their grief, but I'm powerless, a wisp of a soul, knowing all, helping none. If I'd stayed alive, I could have fought for them, loved them, protected them, even after losing everything else. If you die, Eleanor, you'll see your family, your mother, her heartbreak, and it will tear you apart. And the pain you're running from, you won't escape it. You'll face it every day, forced to watch James and his new life, unable to look away. He spoke with a quiet intensity, each word a plea, but Eleanor's sobs only grew louder. She collapsed onto the bed, her strength fading, her cries softening into a mournful wail. Exhaustion overtook her, and as the candle's flame flickered, casting ghostly shadows on the walls, she slipped into unconsciousness, unaware of when sleep claimed her. A clamor of voices and hurried footsteps jolted Eleanor awake. As her eyes fluttered open, a blinding light forced them shut again. She blinked slowly, adjusting to the glare, and gradually the world came into focus. To her astonishment, she was back in her own familiar room, the faded wallpaper and creaking floorboards. Unmistakable. Before her stood her mother, Margaret, her gaunt face etched with worry, her once dark hair now streaked with silver, as if years had passed in mere moments. Eleanor's lips parted to speak, but before a sound could escape, Margaret's voice rang out, trembling with joy. "She's awake. Oh, thank God she's awake." Murmurs of relief filled the room, a chorus of voices overlapping in a chaotic hum. Something cool and wet brushed against Eleanor's lips. She realized it was water, carefully dabbed by her mother, who knew her daughter's parched throat better than anyone. Eleanor parted her lips, swallowing the precious drops, and opened, her eyes fully. Her mother, her aunt, and other loved ones crowded around her, their faces a mix of anxiety and elation. Seeing Eleanor's gaze sharpen with recognition, Margaret burst into tears. "Heaven be praised," she sobbed. "My girls come back to us. These past 2 days, you've had me terrified." Eleanor struggled to lift her hand, her fingers, trembling as they found her mother's. Tears rolled down her cheeks, not the bitter tears of despair, but ones of profound regret. The memories flooded back, her failed attempt by the lake, the strange void she'd wandered into, and the haunting words of the mysterious man. Now she understood. 2 days later, Eleanor was fully alert, her strength returning with surprising speed. Despite Margaret's protests, she insisted on resuming her work at the market, trading goods as she always had. To outsiders, she was unrecognizable as the broken woman who had teetered on the edge of death. She worked, laughed, and chatted with a calm that seemed untouched by her recent ordeal, as if the past had never happened. Some kind-hearted villagers watched her with quiet concern, while others, eager to probe her heart, tested her with pointed remarks. "Heard James's new wife is expecting already," one woman said, her tone laced with curiosity. "Quick work, eh, Eleanor?" Eleanor smiled, her voice steady. "They're not getting any younger, are they? Best they hurry and start a family before they're too old to keep up with a babe." Her nonchalance stunned them. They'd expected tears, a flinch, or at least a hurried retreat to hide her pain. Frustrated by her indifference, they pressed harder. "James is married now," another said, smirking. "When's it your turn, Eleanor? When'll you find a husband?" She laughed, a bright, disarming sound. "When someone comes knocking with a proposal, I suppose. What, do you think I should run out and grab the first man I see off the street?" Her casual wit and unshakable demeanor silenced the gossips. They thrived on seeing others squirm, but Eleanor's indifference left them bored, their barbs falling flat. Soon they moved on, seeking easier targets. Deep within, though, Eleanor hadn't forgotten James. How could she erase someone she'd loved so fiercely, so completely? But she'd learned a bitter truth. No amount of love could hold him, and no amount of grief could undo what was done. So she resolved to let go, to live with a lightness that would ease her mother's worries and spare her family further pain. In her heart, she told herself James wasn't worth her tears. A man so vile didn't deserve her sorrow. She wept not for him, but for herself, for her own naivety. For the years she'd been blind to his deceit, giving everything until she was left with nothing. She began to see her losses as a cruel accident, a storm that had swept through her life. Her body, her savings, her trust all gone, like wreckage after a shipwreck. But she'd survived, hadn't she? She told herself it was like paying a steep price to escape death, a bargain to keep breathing. Day by day, she repeated this mantra, and through a kind of self-imposed hypnosis, the pain began to dull, fading into a quiet ache. As for James and his new wife Clara, the village saw them as the picture of bliss, a perfect match. Clara, a merchant's daughter who dealt with Margaret's business, had crossed paths with James often during his delivery runs. Her polished charm and wealth had dazzled him, blinding him to everything else. But Clara's heart belonged elsewhere, to a married man, an expatriate who'd returned from abroad. Their affair was a secret, hidden in the shadows, impossible to make public through carelessness. Clara had fallen pregnant by her lover. She loved him deeply, and the child was a keepsake of their forbidden bond, one she couldn't bear to part. With Clara, however, was determined to protect her reputation. She had no intention of becoming the subject of village gossip, nor did she want her child to grow up without the semblance of a proper family like any other. Through her frequent dealings with James, she saw in him a handsome, silver-tongued man who could aid her in her business ventures. More importantly, she recognized that with enough money, James could be molded to her will, a puppet dancing to her tune. And so, Clara chose James to be the father of the child she carried, a child conceived not with him, but with her secret lover, a married expatriate whose life was tethered elsewhere. To shield her affair and secure a respectable facade, James was the perfect choice. James, blissfully ignorant of the truth, believed Clara had fallen for his charm and honeyed words. In his heart, there lingered a faint flicker of affection for Eleanor, not love strong enough to outweigh his greed, but enough to stir a fleeting pang of guilt. He knew Eleanor had given him everything, pouring her savings into his hands. Marrying her would mean starting from scratch, for her family had little wealth, and her fortune was the result of her own thrift and foresight. Clara, on the other hand, offered a different future. By marrying her, James would inherit a grand, three-story house in the heart of the village, along with plots of prime land worth a fortune in the years to come. The prospect dazzled him, blinding him to the cost of his betrayal. He steeled himself, casting Eleanor aside with a cruelty calculated to sever their bond swiftly, avoiding any messy entanglements. But his illusions shattered when he learned the truth. Clara was pregnant with another man's child before their wedding. The revelation struck him like a blow, humiliation burning in his chest. He swallowed his pride, consoling himself with thoughts of Clara's wealth, only to face another bitter truth. Clara, ever cunning, had safeguarded her fortune, keeping it separate from their marital assets. James had married her, but he'd inherit nothing, not a penny of her riches. Before their marriage, Clara had been generous, showering him with gifts and allowances. But once the vows were spoken, she became a miser, tallying every shilling, controlling every expense. If James dared spend beyond the daily pittance she allotted, her temper erupted, her words cutting like a blade, heedless of his mother's presence. "Don't think I'm your personal bank, James," she'd snap. "I work hard for my money, and keeping you and your family fed and clothed is more than enough." Don't push me." James bit back his anger, his silence a shield against further. Shame. What could he say? If the truth about Clara's child came out, the village would mock him, not pity him. So he never spoke of the pregnancy, letting Clara's dominance grow unchecked. Their marriage became a living hell, a gilded cage where he was both husband and servant, trapped in a life he'd chosen for greed. More than ever, James regretted his treatment of Eleanor. On the rare occasions their paths crossed in the village, he longed to stop her, to beg forgiveness, but the words choked in his throat, silenced by shame. He schemed to gather enough money to repay her, hoping to ease his conscience, but every plan fell apart. Under Clara's rule, he was little more than a hired hand, given a meager daily allowance for coffee and cigarettes. His meals and clothes were provided, but he had no access to real money. The savings Eleanor had once given him, now absorbed into Clara's coffers, were beyond his reach. James was a man with nothing. Not even his pride doubted times. Despair tempted him to leave Clara, to walk away from it all. But the thought of returning to poverty, of facing Eleanor's certain rejection, paralyzed him. He'd relied on Eleanor for so long, then latched onto Clara. The idea of standing on his own was unimaginable. So despite the bitterness, the humiliation, he endured in silence, mocking himself with a bitter proverb. "You made your bed, now lie in it." One day, during a ferocious argument with Clara, James's rage boiled over. He wanted to smash everything, to let the consequences be damned. In the midst of their shouting, a client arrived, delivering a substantial payment. Clara was in the back of the house, and as she often did when absent, James signed for the money. In the past, he'd never dared keep a penny for himself, fearing Clara's wrath. But this time, his anger consumed him. Without a second thought, he pocketed the sum thousands of pounds and slipped out, changing into fresh clothes and vanishing into the village. Humiliation and resentment churned within him. He was Clara's husband, a man of some standing. Yet even the motorbike Eleanor had bought him wasn't truly his. Clara kept the papers and keys, demanding he account for every trip, granting permission only when she deemed it necessary. As he kicked a discarded bottle across the lane, muttering curses, a rickety coach bound for London pulled up, its horn blaring to summon passengers dock in his frustration. Craving escape from the stifling village, James acted on impulse. A wild thought sparked in his mind, and he leapt aboard, the weight of the stolen money in his pocket giving him a fleeting sense of freedom. Let Clara see I'm not her puppet, he thought, his heart racing. I'll show her I'm a man, not a toy to be jerked about. She regret crossing me. But when he reached London, his bravado faltered. The city was a labyrinth, its streets unfamiliar, its pace overwhelming. He wandered aimlessly, a country lad lost in the urban sprawl, as evening closed in. Return? To the village? No, he could not yet. He had to prove himself, to make Clara respect him, to break free of her control. I'll teach her a lesson, he vowed, his thoughts dark and vengeful. Oi, mate, a voice called, snapping him out of his reverie. You've been pacing round here for ages. Where you headed? Hop in my cab, I'll take you anywhere. Cheap. As chips, no worries. A cab driver pulled up beside James, his voice cheerful but insistent. Need a ride, mate? Where are you off to? James hesitated, scrambling for an excuse. I'm looking for a friend's place, but I've lost the address, he lied, his eyes darting nervously across the bustling London street. The driver leaned forward, undeterred. Got a rough idea where it might be? What street? What borough? I can take you round, knock on a few doors. James shook his head, his voice unsteady. No, I don't remember the street or anything. The driver raised an eyebrow. You must know the borough, though, right? Camden, I think," James blurted, picking a name at random. The driver frowned, scratching his chin, then brightened. "Tell you what, it's getting late too dark to go hunting for addresses now. Let me take you to a decent guest house for the night. Tomorrow, you can pop into the local council office. Give them your friend's name and details. They'll check their records and sort you out in no time." James barely registered the talk of records, but the idea of a place to crash for the night was a relief. He was exhausted, his mind a tangle of anger and regret. "All right," he nodded, climbing into the cab. The driver, chatty and eager, drove him through London's maze of streets, claiming he was searching for a spot that was clean but cheap. Finally, he pulled up outside a townhouse that looked far grander than James expected, its tall windows gleaming faintly in the streetlights. "Here we are," the driver said, gesturing. "Don't let the posh look fool you. The rates are fair." He winked, lowering his voice. "And if you're in the mood for a bit of company, they've got that too. All at a fair price, mind." "You." James forced a grin, paid the fare, and muttered a few polite thanks before trudging toward the entrance, the weight of his stolen money heavy in his pocket. That night, fueled by the cash in his hand, his burning desire to spite Clara, and the ache of his broken dreams, James gave in to temptation. For the first time, he surrendered to the perfumed embrace of the women who worked the shadows of the guest house, their cheap makeup and practiced smiles a stark contrast to the life he'd once imagined with Eleanor. It was a fleeting escape, a reckless act to drown his shame and anger. When he woke the next morning, sated and groggy from a deep sleep, a cold dread settled in his gut. He checked his pocket. The money was nearly half gone. The cab, the room, the women. It shouldn't have cost so much. But in his reckless haze, James had tossed out generous tips, desperate to feel like a man of importance, if only for a night, in the eyes of strangers. Without even stopping for a coffee, he hurried to the bus station, his mind racing with excuses. To placate Clara. The fire of his defiance had burned out, leaving only the ashes of his cowardice. Once again, James was the spineless man he'd always been, slinking back to the life he despised. The fallout from James's reckless trip to London was predictable. Clara's fury was relentless, her tirades of insults, tears, and curses rained down on him with a ferocity that left him cowering. From that day, her grip on him tightened, her control absolute, as if she feared he might slip away again. The house, once a symbol of his greed, became an even more oppressive prison, its grand walls looming like a tomb. Clara gave birth to a daughter, a delicate girl weighing just over 6 pounds, beautiful as a porcelain doll. The village buzzed with congratulations, showering James with well wishes. Even his mother, Agnes, was caught up in the excitement, fussing over her new granddaughter with a mix of joy and anxiety. But James remained distant, his face a mask of indifference, as if the child were a stranger's. And in truth, she was. Only he and Clara knew the secret they shared. With the baby's arrival, Clara's disdain for James deepened. He and his mother were treated less like family and more like servants in Clara's grand house. Agnes, unable to bear her daughter-in-law's cruelty, grew weary of the constant slights. She adored her granddaughter, but each time she reached to hold the child, Clara would snatch her away, citing some excuse of feeding, a change of clothes. It was clear Clara didn't want Agnes near the girl. Frustrated, Agnes confronted James one day, her voice sharp with indignation. "You need to set your wife straight, James. That child's my granddaughter. I've a right to hold her." James's lips twisted into a bitter smile, his words cryptic and heavy with resignation. "Maybe you should pretend she's not your kin, Ma. It'd be easier. Have you ever seen me touch her?" Agnes's eyes widened, her voice trembling. "Water?" You saying? That girl? She's not yours? James shrugged, avoiding her gaze. I didn't say anything. Think what you like. He turned and walked away, leaving Agnes with a storm of questions. Her mind raced as she pieced together the truth. She'd noticed it before James's detachment. His refusal to even look at the child. Could it be? The girl bore no resemblance to him, not a single feature to tie her to her son. God help us, she whispered, tears welling. Is this our punishment, James? For what we did to that poor girl? Overcome with grief and guilt, Agnes stood by the cradle, staring at the child, searching desperately for some trace of her son. But there was nothing. Heartbroken, she gathered her things and returned to her own modest cottage, her thoughts haunted by the memory of James, bringing her money to fix the roof. Eleanor gave it to me, he'd said, his voice bright. She saw the leak swear. You sleep and couldn't stand it. Tears streamed down Agnes's wrinkled cheeks as she mourned the past. James, meanwhile, had grown numb to his humiliated existence. He'd resigned himself to a life of servitude, telling himself he was paying for the debts he'd incurred, debts to Eleanor, to his own greed. He stopped fighting Clara, obeying her every command without protest, playing the part of a loyal dog or a lifeless automaton. He thought submission would bring peace, a quiet end to his days, but fate had other plans. A nagging illness crept into his body, mild at first, a cough, a fever he dismissed as nothing. He'd always shaken off such ailments before, so he ignored, expecting it to pass. But this time, it lingered, growing worse, accompanied by strange new symptoms. Clara, ever vigilant, grew anxious, fearing some contagious disease might threaten her precious daughter. She insisted on taking James to a hospital in the nearby city, her impatience masking a flicker of dread. The doctors took the matter seriously, ordering a battery of tests, complex, invasive procedures that required days to process. James remained, unbothered, his usual nonchalance intact, but Clara was a bundle of nerves, pacing and fretting as the appointment loomed. When the day came, Clara retrieved the results alone, her hands trembling as she read the diagnosis. The world tilted beneath her feet. James was infected with HIV, a disease that carried a stigma as heavy as its prognosis. Rage and terror consumed her. She unleashed a torrent of abuse on James, her screams echoing through the hospital corridor, before rushing to have herself and her daughter tested. The days that followed were an agony of waiting, each moment stretched. Taut with fear, Clara felt the specter of death hovering, its cold breath on her neck. But when the results came back, relief washed over her. Both she and her daughter were untouched by the disease. Elated, Clara wasted no time. She confronted James, her voice cold and final, as she revealed his diagnosis and demanded a divorce. "You're a danger to us," she said, her eyes blazing. "I want you gone." James froze, the weight of the news crashing over him. Then, inexplicably, he began to laugh, a wild, unhinged sound that sent a chill through Clara. Frightened by his mania, she softened her tone, offering a deal. "I'll give you money, a good son to treat your illness. But you sign the divorce papers and never come near us again." James agreed without hesitation, not for the money, but because he knew his time was running out. He saw it clearly now. This was his reckoning, the price for his betrayals, for the pain he'd inflicted on Eleanor and others. He wanted no more burdens on anyone, not Clara, not his mother, not the world he'd wronged. The news of James and Clara's divorce sent ripples of shock through the village, but Eleanor carried on as if untouched by the gossip. She showed no joy, no sorrow, no curiosity, her face a mask of calm indifference. The villagers spun their tales. Some whispered that James still pined for Eleanor, sparking Clara's jealousy. Others claimed Clara couldn't tolerate his laziness. But the true reason remained hidden, locked away in Clara's heart. She guarded the secret of James's illness fiercely, fearing that its revelation would condemn her and her daughter to a life of isolation. Shunned by the tight-knit community, James returned to his mother's modest cottage, where the two lived in near seclusion, avoiding contact with neighbors to shield their shame and James's unspoken affliction. Few knew of his condition, and he intended to keep it that way. He began disappearing for weeks at a time, his absences initially sparking curiosity among the villagers. But as time dulled their interest, the whispers faded, and James became a ghost in his own village, seen but rarely spoken of. Life moved forward quietly. Eleanor prepared to marry a schoolteacher named Thomas, who taught at the local secondary. School but worked tirelessly at odd jobs in his spare time. Margaret wept with joy, grateful that her daughter had found a man worthy of her, a stark contrast to James. From the moment Thomas had shown interest, Margaret had approved, even before Eleanor's heart had fully won to him as Eleanor's. Family bustled with wedding preparations. The cottage where James and his mother lived faced demolition. The local council had been planning the clearance for years, and now the final deadline loomed. Whether this was a blessing or a curse for James and Agnes, no one could say. With a substantial compensation payment in hand, they packed their belongings and left the village without a word to their neighbors, vanishing into the fog like specters. One evening, as Eleanor passed the now empty plot where the cottage had stood, her heart caught in her throat. The barren ground, once the foundation of her dreams of a life with James, stared back at her, cold and desolate. Tears welled in her eyes, not for the love she'd lost, but for pity. She felt a pang of sorrow for James, wondering what had become of him. On her wedding day, a package arrived, delivered without a sender's name. Curiosity gnawed at Eleanor, and unable to wait until the reception ended, she slipped into a quiet room to open it. Inside the plain wrapping was a staggering sum of money, far more than any guest would give as a gift. Her breath caught panic, rising as she wondered who could have sent such a fortune and why. Did they have some hidden motive? But as she examined the package, her eyes fell on a faint inscription scrawled in pencil along the side, a handwriting she knew all too well. "Wishing you happiness, Eleanor. Please forgive me. This is a fraction of what you gave me before." It was James. The package could only be from him. But why now? Why return the money after all this time? Was he truly remorseful? And why? At this moment, when she'd moved on, rather than when she'd been drowning in despair, had something happened to him? Even after his divorce, he'd seemed detached, not broken. Questions swirled in Eleanor's mind, each one unanswered, pulling at the edges of her resolve. She shook her head, muttering to herself, "Let him be. It's no concern of mine anymore. He's paid me back, and that's that." She tried to focus on her wedding, on the joy of her new life with Thomas. But fleeting thoughts of James crept in, tugging at her curiosity. What had driven him to this act? What was happening to him now? 3 days after her wedding, Eleanor dreamt she was wandering, lost in a place both familiar and alien. The fog thickened around her, guiding her to the same strange cottage she'd once visited, a place the mysterious man had called the Edge of Nowhere. The scene was as bleak as before, shrouded in a twilight haze, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness. The small, desolate house stood unchanged, its silence oppressive, as if it held the weight of countless forgotten souls. Eleanor stepped cautiously inside, her voice barely a whisper. "Hello, are you there?" As her words faded, a faint spark flared in the shadowed corner, like the strike of a match. She squinted and saw him, the man from before, his gaunt frame, illuminated by the cold, flickering light of a single white candle. His bony hand held it steady, the flame casting ghostly shadows that danced across the walls like restless spirits. You're still here? Eleanor asked, her voice trembling with a mix of curiosity and unease. The man's lips curved into a faint, melancholic smile. Not for long, lass, he said softly. Thanks to you, my time here is nearly done. Done? Eleanor's brow furrowed. Where are you going? To be reborn, he replied, his voice tinged with a quiet joy. In 2 days, this existence ends. My soul will be taken to start anew, no more drifting in this wretched half-life. I've waited for this, counting every second. Eleanor studied him, her curiosity piqued. Is this place truly as terrible as you said? I thought you were just trying to scare me, to keep me from. She trailed off, the memory of her despair by the lake still raw. The man shook his head, his eyes glinting in the candlelight, sharp and knowing. I wasn't lying, Eleanor. Every word was true. If you doubt me, step outside. Listen, really listen. Driven by a restless curiosity, she turned and moved to the doorway, leaning against the weathered frame. Her eyes strained into the impenetrable. Darkness beyond, a void so dense it seemed to swallow the world. She held her breath, ears straining. The silence was absolute, no chirping crickets, no rustling leaves, none of the familiar night sounds that had once grated on her nerves with their mournful cadence. But this silence was worse, a suffocating hush that pressed against her mind, tightening until it felt like her skull might crack. Then, from the depths of that eerie stillness, a sound emerged, a low, keening wail, more anguished than any funeral dirge. It was faint, almost imperceptible, yet it pierced her, sending chills racing down her spine. Her heart pounded as she stumbled back inside, her voice shaking. What was that? The man's gaze remained fixed on the candle, its flame wavering as if stirred by an unseen breath. The cries of lost souls, he said calmly. They weep day and night, yearning for release, for a chance to live again as mortals. Eleanor's eyes widened, disbelief warring with dread. Live again? But why? Their lives were so full of pain they fled to this place. Why would they want to return? He stared into the flame, its light casting hollows in his face, making him appear almost skeletal. Here, they see clearly, he said, his voice slow and deliberate. They see the joys of life they overlooked, the small moments of happiness they could have cherished. Humans are never content with what they have, always chasing what's out of reach, clinging to sorrow instead of embracing the light around them. In this place, regret consumes them. They long to return, to hold dear the fleeting joys they squandered. But when they're reborn, they forget these lessons, these feelings. The cycle repeats, trapping them in their own mistakes. That's what makes a life, Eleanor. He paused, then continued, his voice softer but heavy with meaning. You're luckier than most. You came here while still alive, so you'll remember. I beg you cherish your life, guard it fiercely. Never again think of throwing it away. I'm glad you found happiness now, a family of your own. And I'll share a secret. You and your husband will grow old together, living long lives. But he hesitated, the candle's flame flickering as if echoing his reluctance. Eleanor leaned forward, her voice urgent. But what? He sighed, a sound like the wind through barren branches. You'll struggle to have children. If you want a full family, do good deeds, live with kindness. Your fate can shift for the better. Eleanor nodded, her heart heavy with gratitude. Thank you, she said. I'll remember your words. But why am I here again tonight? A man fixed his gaze on Eleanor, his voice a soft whisper that seemed to echo in the dim cottage. Before I go to be reborn, I wanted to bid you farewell, he said. After all, we've a connection, haven't we? Eleanor nodded, her heart heavy with the strangeness of it all. It's time I sent you back, he continued, rising slowly, as if preparing to usher her out. "I've my own journey to begin." Eleanor hesitated, her voice faltering. "Will I never see you again?" He chuckled, a dry, hollow sound that was the first she'd ever heard from him. "What? You'd want to meet a ghost like me again? But who knows? Perhaps in my next life, I'll be someone new, and one day our paths might cross by chance. Life is full of mysteries, Eleanor. Take that man who broke your heart. He, too, is nearing the end of this life, ready to be reborn. The world turns on borrowing and repaying, forever in balance." Eleanor's breath caught, her eyes wide with shock. "You mean James? James is dying?" "I can only tell you so much," the man said, his tone heavy with regret. "Forgive." But that's all I'm permitted to say. Come now, let's get you home." Her mind raced, a tumult of fear and confusion. As she stepped forward, her foot caught on the threshold, and she stumbled, crashing to the ground. When she scrambled to her feet, a blinding light flooded her senses. She was no longer in the void. She was in her own bedroom, the familiar. Walls bathed in morning light. Was it a dream? Or had her soul truly slipped free of her body to visit that strange place, to say goodbye to a ghostly acquaintance? Eleanor's thoughts swirled, doubt warring with conviction. The encounter felt too vivid, too real to be a mere dream. She remembered her last visit to the edge of nowhere, and slowly she began to believe her soul had indeed wandered. There again, if it was true, then James was dying? Her heart ached, not for love, but for pity for him, for his aging mother Agnes. "God, if this is James's punishment for what he did to me," she whispered, her voice trembling, "I beg you to forgive him. I'm no longer in pain, no longer angry or resentful. I've let it go, all of it. Please, let him live a normal life, to care for his mother in her twilight years." Her thoughts drifted to the man's warning about her, and Thomas's childlessness, and his advice to do good deeds to shift their fate. Reflecting on her life, Eleanor realized she'd never been cruel, never harmed another soul. Perhaps her hardships were the weight of some past life's karma, as the man had implied. So be it, she thought. She'd live virtuously, not just to ease her conscience, but to store up good fortune for her descendants, for whatever lay beyond this life. Lost in these musings, she drifted back to sleep, unaware of when slumber claimed her. Time passed quietly, life settling into a gentle rhythm. Eleanor all but forgot the dream, its edges softened by the days. Though not wealthy, she and Thomas built a comfortable life through her careful management and their shared diligence. Whenever possible, Eleanor gave generously to the poor, earning the village's respect and affection for their kindness. Each year, as the first full moon of spring approached, the market traders and neighboring folk would make pilgrimages to ancient churches or rural shrines, praying for prosperity and health. Eleanor often joined them, but this year, Thomas suggested a different journey, a trip to London, to visit sanctuaries that cared for orphans and the infirm. Eleanor's heart twinged. They'd been married for years without children, and she wondered if Thomas, feeling the weight of their childlessness, was considering adoption. She wanted to ask, but held her tongue. Visiting these places aligned with her own quiet hopes. So she agreed. They spent nearly a day traveling, stopping at 3 churches, 2 orphanages, and a care home for the elderly. At each, Eleanor's heart broke for the suffering she saw, the abandoned children, the frail elders. Their plights made her own blessings starkly clear, filling her with gratitude for her life. With Thomas Dot by mid-afternoon, they prepared to head home, but Thomas, on a whim, turned toward one last stop, a hospice for those with terminal illnesses, many afflicted with HIV, left without family or refuge. Most of the staff were volunteers, though some were patients themselves, still in the early stages of their disease. Eleanor and Thomas walked among the beds, their hearts heavy at the sight of skeletal figures, their bodies ravaged, some covered in sores, too weak to even moan. Suddenly, Eleanor felt a prickling at the back of her neck, as if someone were watching her. She turned and caught the gaze of a patient across the room. His eyes locked on hers with an intensity that felt both familiar and alien. Those eyes, they stirred something deep within her, a memory she couldn't place. But his body was unrecognizable. A gaunt frame, little more than bones wrapped in mottled, ulcerated skin. His cheeks were sunken, his eye sockets hollow, his shaved head resembling a skull, coated in a thin, ashen veneer. Man or woman, she couldn't tell, only those haunting eyes held her. Familiar yet elusive. No one can predict what tomorrow holds, and life, with all its twists, unfolds in ways no one can foresee. A month after the hospice visit, Eleanor felt a subtle change in her body and visited a doctor. After a series of tests, the physician, a kind woman with a warm smile, looked at Eleanor and said, "Congratulations, my dear. You're going to be a mother." Eleanor, seated in the sterile clinic, nearly leapt from her chair, her heart soaring with joy. It was the same doctor who, at a previous visit, had gently warned her that conceiving might be nearly impossible. "Doctor, are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling with hope. The doctor patted her hand reassuringly. "Absolutely. You're 1 month along, and both you and the baby are doing splendidly. Cases like yours are rare. You know, truly a blessing." From that moment, Eleanor and Thomas were overcome with elation. Their home, once quiet, buzzed with the promise of new life, their shared joy a light that banished the shadows of the past. They made regular visits to Agnes at the hospice chapel, an unspoken duty they both felt deeply. Neither needed to voice it. Caring for James's mother was a quiet commitment, a way to honor the past while embracing their future. Years passed, and their son William grew into a remarkable man. He excelled in his studies and became a renowned businessman, respected in international trade circles. Beyond his success, he was beloved for his tireless work in charity, his devotion to his parents, and his boundless kindness. Wherever he went, people admired him, not just for his achievements, but for his generous heart. The villagers looked to Eleanor and Thomas with envy and admiration, their lives a testament to resilience and love. Their days were filled with contentment, their happiness enduring through the years, a quiet triumph over the trials of their past. Yet, in fleeting moments, Eleanor would recall the mysterious man from the edge of nowhere, his words about life's cycle of borrowing and repaying, echoing faintly like a whisper from a dream.